dropping that fucking card game name. Fucking Yu-Gi-Oh! I did end up getting into Magic for a while, but and I liked it more than Yu-Gi-Oh! But I've sort of now we meet Malik. I can show you the item dupe if you want, because we're gonna be heading past a store that sells swords. I liked Yu-Gi-Oh! It got really, really dumb. I gave up on it when I learned about Magic and got into Magic. And I'm glad I did, because the moment they added synchros and XYZs and all this crazy fusion shit, it went from unbalanced but fair to unbalanced but unbalanced. Where unless you had these synchros or these XYZs, you lose. That wasn't fun anymore. Because I went back to try and play it with a couple friends. And all my friends play Magic now, which I love, but at the same time it came too late. Because I've given up on physical cards, and Magic doesn't have a good online card area. Like, if I was gonna get into a card game now, I'd go back to Hearthstone, or I'd pick up Infinity Wars again. Because they're not... It's not clutter. And it's easier to get into those games because you don't have to pay for them. And Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! Get very expensive. And it's gotten easier to win with it over the years, but it's still not like... The thing I remember is one of my friends was watching card games on the website we were using. We were using the Dueling Network website because it's pretty much the best way to play it for free at this point. Anyway, we were watching people who were actually like high rating on the website play, and it was every game Stardust Dragon, Stardust Dragon, Stardust Dragon. And once he used it, I realized unless you use a specific counter to these synchros and these XYZs, you just don't win anymore. The good decks are all like 1, 2, 3 turn victories. It's so stupid that it's no longer fun. And Magic has that too, but in the new rules it's easier to win with Exodia because there are more cards that can let you get cards into your hand, like search your library. Like with the new cards and whatnot. When I was playing, I had an Exodia deck that had a fairly good win rate. Okay, so the item dupe. Let's see if I can get this to work now. You need a sword that isn't as good as the swords that are being sold, or a shield, and a sword that's better than the swords being sold, the sword you want to dupe. It doesn't have to be swords, any one-handed weapon can work, but the one you want to dupe has to be better than the swords in the shop. Since we already have the Rune Blade, this is a diamond sword, so then you go to the shopkeeper with the sword you want to dupe in the left hand, the bottom hand. You get a best fit, and that might be wrong. Let me try it again. It's supposed to work that way, which is weird. Maybe they have the hands backwards. I got this to work when I last played it, and I don't know why it's not working. It's so frustrating now, though, because I'm not using it, so it doesn't bother me, really. It does bother me that when I'm trying to show it off, it doesn't work, because that's fucking stupid. It should, for all intensive purposes, work every single time I do it. And I'm not sure why it isn't. Regardless, it has something to do with the shop, essentially, and duplicating your weapons. It might be easier to wait until I get a Knight Sword to try, because Knight Swords I'll only have one of when I get them. So, it might be more prudent to, plus they're never sold in the shop. The Rune Sword will be sold eventually in the shop. I've gotten it to work with swords before, that's why it's bothering me. But for some reason it's not working. And that bothers me more. Do I have an extra shield in here? Let's try it with the shield. There we go. Okay. It's expensive because the Rune Blade is expensive. But if we go in here now, I just bought a Rune Blade. I have 3 Rune Blades now instead of 2. The problem was it doesn't work with swords, apparently. It's supposed to, but it doesn't. It definitely works with a shield. Because you want to be using 2 swords at all time. So it'll swap your best sword to the top, while unequipping your sword at the bottom. So it essentially takes a sword out of the shop inventory to put in the top and unequips your sword. So it gives you a sword for the cost of the selling price of the sword, if I recall. Because with Excalibur it costs 60... It costs 50 gil. So it costs 50 gil to duplicate the Excalibur. I'm not going to do it again, and I won't be doing it with Knight Swords now that I've shown it off, because I don't need any more Rune Blades. Nor do I really want to game the system that much. If I wanted to make the playthrough easier, I definitely would. Because with 5 Excaliburs, you win the game, period. The game is over. You don't even need item anymore. With 9 Excaliburs. Oh no. Yeah, no. Yes, but no. 8 Excaliburs. With Agris and Orlando and then 3 Knights, the game is over, you don't need item. Because Excalibur is auto permanent haste in vanilla. Agris and Orlando will kill things with Excalibur's damage and the haste factor. We're just gonna rush through chapter 2 into chapter 3 into chapter 4. So I want to get to Bethel Garrison. I really want to get to Bethel Garrison. It's been so long. I need it. It's no longer a want, it's a need. I need to see TG Sid. Excalibur is in my opinion, the reason melee classes, sword classes are imbalanced at the core. The knight, the swordsman, the holy swordsman, the holy knight, the dark knight. You can't actually get a dark knight in this game. The temple knight, the arc knight. I don't remember Beowulf's knight name. I think he's the temple knight. And Meliadul. They're all imbalanced because of this one sword. It's not the class that's imbalanced, it's the sword. Granted, the Holy Swordsman is extremely powerful, but it is definitely offset by its speed. Try playing Orlando with his bracer without Excalibur. You'll hate it. You'll want to put sprint shoes on. You'll definitely want to give him back his auto haste. I've done it. My very first playthrough, I beat the game. I gave Orlando the Ragnarok for the final fight. He did nothing. He got one turn the whole fight. That's how I know his class isn't broken. It was Final Fantasy IX, and it's hard as shit to get if you're like me. In fact, it's so hard to get that I've never gotten it. Because I'm not going to sacrifice my playstyle for the strongest sword in the game. I'm sorry. It might help me beat the optional boss easier, but that's one game I'll never 100% with a certainty. Because it pains my face hole to not grind, especially that game. Because that game, the core mechanics are around grinding. To keep your skills, you have to grind. So I always want to grind and I still haven't beat that game. I will go back to that game and start a playthrough. I could do that next, but that would be really long. Because while I do remember the game a little bit, not enough to be able to just beat it. That's why I never finished it, is because I opened the game back up after taking a long break from it and had no idea where I was. I had no idea how to get to the final temple. I disagree, but I grind. You have no idea how much grinding affects a playthrough. Well, you might, because you've grinded really hard in this game. Ozma is definitely hard to beat. The optional boss. But that's like saying Ruby Weapon is hard to beat in Final Fantasy VII. Yes, it is. With preparation, they aren't. Like Omega Weapon's hard to beat in 8, but I've done it. I prepare for it every single time I've done it, but the difficulty level of the Final Fantasy games is kind of one of the reasons I love them. It's because it doesn't I was over 80 by the time I finished. By the time I got to Ozma at on 9. The only Final Fantasy game I don't grind to the extent of absurdity is 7, because it's by far the easiest to finish. Of the ones I've beaten, anyway. Nothing against 7. It's a good game. A little confusing for some people. Emerald Weapon was easier than Ruby though, in most cases. Without final attack, Ruby Weapon was almost impossible. I hated Emerald Weapon, don't get me wrong. That fight was just as annoying as Ruby Weapon for me, but I have beaten Emerald Weapon more times than I have beaten Ruby Weapon. I've only beaten Ruby Weapon once. For a general rule of thumb, if you will. Because I've only gotten final attack once. It was in the PC version of the game that was just re-released. Because there was an achievement to do so. So I did so. Well, actually, now that I think about it, I've beaten Ruby Weapon twice. But I've only gotten final attack once. Because I forgot I have beaten Ruby Weapon on the PlayStation. It was a hell of a fight, and I never want to think about that fight. That sounds improbable to me. Just because Emerald is really, really simple with grinding. You grind Mime twice so that you have 3 mines. Knights of the Round and then Mime Chain. Emerald's dead. Plus you can farm elixirs or mega elixirs, I forget which, when you're farming AP and XP. So your supply of full health regeneration is not limited if you prepare correctly. So Emerald dies really quickly even though it has more health and more devastating attacks. You have an easier way to combat him than Ruby, because Ruby retaliates to Knights of the Round. Emerald doesn't. Yeah. The only hard part about Emerald Weapon, my opinion again, because I'm only speaking from experience and using the mime strategy to beat him, is making sure you don't queue your attacks too often. You always want somebody open so that you can quickly get off a Mega Elixir or an Elixir when you need it. If you don't do that, then you're going to die because you are over queuing your characters to attack. There's too much attack going on, not enough anticipation for what could happen. Which is one of my downfalls when fighting optional bosses, with the exception of Final Fantasy VIII's Omega Weapon, because there's no need. 90% of the time with Omega Weapon, you need one person open only after a few attacks to reapply Holy War. So, why didn't you get underwater? That's primary preparation for that fight, is to farm the ghost ship with Manipulate. Without it, there's no point in trying to fight him, because you don't have the time most of the time. 10 minutes is too short a fight for that much HP. And underwater eliminates the timer. So, that would be my recommendation. Once you get underwater and the timer isn't an issue, the fight is easier. Because you farm the ghost ship, you manipulate it, get the book, bring the book to the guy. Yeah. By the time I got to the weapons, I had my hands on, and you're gonna see this now, and you'll see why I've been looking downward every once in a while. On these. This one was actually bought for me while I was learning this game. I beat this game before I used this, but I had it available to me. This, since you can't see it very well, is a very worn out copy of the Final Fantasy Tactics Strategy Guide. By the time I even bothered, one of my babysitters, because I was a youngin', and my parents were responsible enough to make sure they didn't want their house to be blown up, had us babysitters when they were gone. One of my babysitters watched me playing Final Fantasy 7 and 8, and he happened to have the Final Fantasy 7 and 8 strategy guides in his car, and he just sort of gave them to me. He didn't plan on me keeping them, but my mom never hired them again because she never needed to. So I inadvertently ended up keeping the Final Fantasy 7 and 8 strategy guides, which the 7 strategy guide is in terrible, terrible condition. I don't know what he did to them, but they were falling apart before I got them, and the spine was destroyed. Which I got those guides after I beat 7 and 8. This guide I got before I beat Tactics. But I didn't use it until after I beat it because my game was already broken. Then I went back and used it to do all the optional stuff. But these are also the only 3 guides I own, and probably the only 3 guides I'll ever own. Because we're in the age of technology now. And there's no reason for them. But we were starting to be in the age of technology then, but my parents were technophobes. Very big technophobes. And we didn't have a working computer in our house for way too long. Like, by the time we got a computer that wasn't, like, only usable for, that's fine. Understandable. My dashboard crashes at least once a cast because of my computer being terrible. My laptop. My computer's also not that great for streaming, but it's workable. It's why I don't have 60 frames a second. If you haven't noticed, you might have, because my camera isn't 60 frames, but the game, I don't remember if the PlayStation was 60 frames, but the cast isn't, because my CPU can't handle it. And I have no way of replacing it without replacing the whole system to get one that can. So, kinda stuck where I am in quality. But everything else is good. My bitrate is about where it should be for the quality. And it's 720p, so. Can't complain too much. Oh, that sucks. Welcome back, though. Yeah, my laptop does that from time to time. That I use for the dashboard, and it's guaranteed to crash once a cast. So I'm used to that kind of thing. I might need refreshing on the topic, because I tend to ramble, and then there's so much that's been said. Oh, interesting. So it could have just been a server system like, thing. I've never actually tried streaming from a gaming device, because the only one I have is my 360 that doesn't ever see use. And I don't have gold, so it doesn't really matter anyway. But, yeah. Yeah. Perfectly understandable response, too. That would be... That's slightly less graphic than what my response would be, to be perfectly honest. I'm really over the top in my reactions to little things.